and the hopes of a ceasefire were shattered. A volley of rockets were fired from the Gaza Strip toward the southern communities of Israel. A short while later, long-range projectiles were also launched toward areas south of Jerusalem, setting off sirens in the Etzion settlement block and Beit Shemesh for the first time since the violence erupted. No injuries were reported in the late morning attacks. In the afternoon, and in response to the rocket fire from Gaza, the IDF in a targeted assassination took out another senior member of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad terror group, bringing the total now to 6 eliminated commanders. Many of the fresh short-range rockets from Gaza on Friday were downed by the Iron Dome air defense system or landed in open areas. The medium-range David Sling's air defense system, however, made a second-ever successful interception during the rocket attack directed at the Jerusalem area. While the Iron Dome and David Sling interceptors have shot down more than 90% of rockets fired at southern and central Israel, malfunctions happen, as it did on Thursday in Rehovot. The failed interception and direct hit on a house killed an elderly woman, Inga Abraham, 80 years old, marking the first Israeli death in this round of fighting.
It was, I think, at about 6 p.m. I was lying in bed and I vaguely could hear the alarm sounding. At first, I actually thought it was from a nearby city, like maybe Nes Ziona or Rishon. I was like part awake, part in a dream. And after what seemed like about 1 minute, then I had the explosion, and the ground shook a little.
Meanwhile, on Friday, Israelis were inspecting the damage done to the house in Rehovot, especially after concerns were voiced by medical and emergency workers at the scene that due to the supporting beams being damaged, the entire building may in fact collapse. And with me here in studio is Rafael Yerushalmi, a former senior intelligence officer in the IDF and a security analyst. Rafael, just before we started the broadcast, you mentioned to me that the demonstrations that would have been going on now for a 19th week have been cancelled tomorrow night because of the situation on the border region between Israel and Gaza. Talk to us a little bit about how this plays into politics. Yesterday, we asked a question whether or not starting or at least engaging in a war with Gaza was for any purposes some kind of political gain.
Yes, Benjamin Netanyahu has been suspected of starting this conflict because he would divert the attention from the internal strife in the political life of Israel. I would personally think that it's a little far-fetched. I mean, the price seems a bit high. I'm sure he's not too sorry that this is happening because it does divert the attention from the political strife, but I don't think he initiated this kind of situation. Unfortunately, it was coming. I think it is more the interest of the Iranians to initiate this kind of situation. They have a little indirect war, maybe with the more to the right parties of the Israeli political map. Right now, there is a little war because we have on next Thursday the Jerusalem March, or the March of the Flags, which is always considered as a provocation. I would like to remind you that it's never been a provocation at all. It is a march that has been practiced for many years, very peacefully with Israeli flags. It's a festival. It's with children, elderly people. Of late, it has been said that it's a provocation because it goes through the old city of Jerusalem, like the Arab quarters, and because many Arab countries oppose it. But there is no provocation there. But the Iranians are building on this. They seem to have ordered the Islamic Jihad to hold until then and to disrupt this march. I remind you that the Islamic Jihad, in its claims for a ceasefire, amongst its many claims, would like this march to be cancelled, which of course the Israelis will never do, especially today with the political map and the right parties absolutely wanting to do the march. And absolutely wanting to go through the Arabic quarters, of course. So all this imbroglio of political life in Israel and this attack, of course, also there was the feeling amongst our enemies that the political strife in Israel was weakening the country, and they have actually strengthened the country. There's a lot of solidarity, there's a lot of unity that we hadn't seen for many weeks because of the different opinions in Israel. And right now the Israeli people are very, very united, and the opposition is supporting the government. So it's exactly the contrary effect that they have obtained.
Stay with us just a moment. I do want to cross now, though, to the south, where our correspondent Hamda Salchud is standing by in the southern city of Sderot. Hamda, over 1,000 rockets fired by Palestinian Islamic Jihad in Gaza at Israel, mainly at the south in recent moments. What have you been seeing and hearing on the ground there?
Good evening, Batia. Here about an hour ago, we did have a direct interception right over our heads. There have not been sirens in Sderot since the early morning, but there have been sirens and red alerts all across southern parts of Israel, including even in Jerusalem. The Israeli military says that they're expecting more long-range missiles from Palestinian Islamic Jihad coming out of the Gaza Strip. But here in Sderot, it's a little bit quiet, especially because it's Friday evening, the beginning of the Jewish Sabbath. And we did run into the mayor of Sderot here, who did have some strong words to relay. Take a listen.
We will stay here as long as necessary. And if we will need to stay in shelters for another 20 or even 30 days, we will. We will give our full support to Prime Minister, our country, and our military to protect us. Leaders of the Arab world, wake up. The responsibility is on Hamas and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. Make them lay down their weapons, because the violence causes only suffering for the entire region, not only to Israeli, but mostly to the Gazan residents that are looking for a future, for security and education. Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad are taking all this money, stealing it from the residents. They make this money and buy weapons, bombs and rockets. What good has that given them over all these years?
The mayor of Sderot there making mention to Hamas, the de facto rulers of the Strip that have so far been on the sidelines, but we know that they have sent a message via Egypt that if fighting continues, they will get involved. Hamza, how would this change the course of the conflict?
If Hamas were to get involved in this round of fighting, the escalation would be sure to be seen on both sides of the aisle, both here in Israel and in the Gaza Strip. Hamas has more sophisticated weapons, more long-range missiles, weapons we haven't really seen in a couple of years. So their arsenal has been stockpiled, perhaps waiting for a round of conflict. Now, because of the civilian casualties and the toll on the civilian infrastructure that's been hit, sources are saying that there is going to be no choice but for them to get involved. We can be sure to see a much longer and devastating conflict if they are to get involved. They've been speaking out today more than they have been since Tuesday, saying that the resistance in the Gaza Strip is united and ready.
Hamda Salchud there in the southern city of Sderot. Stay safe. We will be coming to you later on in the broadcast. And just to update you, just moments ago, red alert sirens, incoming rockets were going off in the Gaza envelope area. So those residencies and communities just outside of the border between Gaza and Israel. And we see more going off now as well. Rafael Yerushalmi, stay with me. I would like to continue the conversation once we get back, but we are going out now for a short break. But when we get back, we'll discuss possible mediation efforts by Egypt as well as Qatar and the United Nations to possibly consider putting some kind of hindrance or ceasefire on this conflict that only seems to be heating up. But perhaps the storm will come before the calm, especially if Hamas does indeed decide to get involved. Once again, you are watching a special coverage here on I-24 News, an extended edition covering day 4 of Operation Shield and Arrow by the IDF, their operation taking place in the Gaza Strip. We'll have much more when we get back. 2 minutes. We'll be right back. Stay with us.
The Middle East is changing. Old alliances make way for new partnerships.
Bigger threats lead to new relationships, and shared goals mean new opportunities.
We speak to those who know the inside story and are at the heart of the changes.
Don't get caught up with the same old story.
Find out what's happening in Middle East Now.
Middle East Now on I-24 News.
The I-24 News team of talented correspondents are working hard for you. They're in the markets, on the streets, in the battlefields, getting the pulse of the story. Tune in for Beyond the Headlines to see how the top stories of the week are affecting real people. No commentary, no debate, just the best stories presented by our best journalists.
Should I go to VivaTech in Paris this June?
VivaTech is Europe's biggest startup and tech event. This is where business meets innovation. Jumpstart business deals with the leaders in tech. Discover cutting-edge innovation. Meet the brightest minds changing the world.
Is it worth it?
Weren't you listening? It's the #1 startup and tech event in Europe. Be there.
Welcome back. Thank you so much for staying with us here on our special coverage on I-24 News Extended Edition on the Operation Shield and Arrow by the IDF that they are conducting in Gaza. Meanwhile, according to Israeli media reports, Israel has cut off talks for a ceasefire agreement with Palestinian Islamic Jihad after the terror group renewed intense rocket fire on Israel Friday morning. The rocket attack shattered several hours of calm that had raised hopes overnight for a deal to end the hostilities amid efforts by Egypt, Qatar and the United Nations to broker indirect talks. Ceasefire efforts had been held up by Islamic Jihad's demand that Israel halts targeted assassinations in the Strip, a proposal Jerusalem rejected outright. Both sides have threatened that fire will be met with fire, and until one stops, neither will the other. Joining me now from Cairo in Egypt is Hussein Hariri, a former Egyptian assistant foreign minister and the former director for the Israel Department for the Egyptian Foreign Ministry. And still with me here in studio, Rafael Yerushalmi, a former senior intelligence officer in the IDF and a security analyst. Gentlemen, thank you both very much for joining me here this evening. And with your permission, I'd like to bounce between the ceasefire or potential ceasefire efforts as well as the current operation. And starting with you, Hussein, ceasefire negotiations appear to be all but stalled following the renewed attacks today being Friday. So where do we go to from here? What is Egypt's position?
Well, our position is to prevent further escalation in the showdown, the military showdown between the Israelis and the al-Jihad, the Islamic Jihad. This latest round of infighting or military confrontation goes back to May 2nd after the announcement of the death of the Palestinian prisoner. So we believe that as long as the Israelis maintain their aggressive policies towards the Gaza Strip, I guess we will be in this vicious circle. This is not the first time that the Israeli forces attack the Gaza Strip. We stopped counting in not only in Egypt, but in the Arab world, as a matter of fact, how many times the Israelis went on the attack against the Palestinian resistance in the Gaza Strip. And the second thing, madam, is the bottom line is that as long as the Israeli siege to the Gaza Strip that dates back to 2007 would remain, I guess it would be impossible to imagine calm, tranquility, peace between the Palestinians in Gaza and Israel.
Right. And Rafael, Earlier, we were speaking about the fact that residents in the south have the ability to run to shelters and safe spaces. We even spoke to our correspondent who is there now, Hamza Salkhut, wearing the correct protective gear. But where is the condemnation on the leadership of Hamas and the PIJ for not providing the same sort of safe spaces to residents that happen to get caught in the crossfire?
Yes, well, you obviously don't hear it from Egypt, but of course we condemn, because I can guarantee you that the leaders of the Hamas and the Islamic Jihad have very well-equipped bunkers, very bravely hidden under schools and hospitals, but the normal Palestinian people have no shelters, and we have no score to settle with them. We have no hatred, we have no bitterness towards the Palestinian people. I think the best thing we can do for them is free them from the dictatorship of fanatical people. I'm surprised that an enlightened Egyptian diplomat would even consider supporting, especially in Egypt, people who are emanating from the Muslim Brotherhood that has inflicted so much pain in Egypt itself. The Muslim Brotherhood, whether it's the Hamas or the Islamic Jihad, I can only say that the Palestinian people from the street, the normal people, have no shelter, unlike the Israelis, and the only shelter they do have, because remember that the terrorists use them as human shields, the only shelter that they have is the ethical standards of the IDF, of Tzahal, because we try to avoid shooting at innocent people. We do hit them sometimes, we regret it, it's called collateral damage and we hate it, and we try to prevent it, we are the shelter of the Palestinian people, we are the shelter of the Palestinian children, because we really try our best not to hit them. We try also our best to hit terrorists. I will just reveal that in the operation rooms of the IDF headquarters in Tel Aviv, in underground, there are legal advisors accompanying every operation, speaking with officers. These advisors are also specialized in international law. They have authorized some targeted killings, knowing that there was the wife or the children present in the flat that was hit, but this is because by international law you can do this, like it was done for bin Laden, if in exchange you will avoid more casualties, more children and women being killed by these terrorist actions that these terrorists that have been eliminated operate. That's the only way. But I can guarantee you that we are one of the rare armies in the world that will never ever consider normal or to shoot at innocent people and children, and certainly not at the Palestinian people of Gaza, for whom we have only we are distressed just as they are to be under such a horrible regime of the Hamas. And I'm sorry to hear what I've just heard now, because we are counting on Egypt very much to mediate between us and the Palestinians. We might not be right, we might be wrong in their eyes, but we certainly don't need to hear accusations. What we do need is actually to appease, to have a language of serenity, and we really do hope that we can put an end to all this violence.
And Hussein, I want to ask you in a moment about strategy and tactics, but just before that, we are seeing updates from Israeli media, reports that Egypt has come back with an updated ceasefire agreement that they are offering through to Israel. So it will be interesting to see how that unfolds. But regarding strategy, Jerusalem is incredibly important for the Muslim world, and there is no denying that. So where does Egypt stand when, for example, like today being Friday, the Palestinian Islamic Jihad is targeting Jerusalem with some of its rockets? That must be quite difficult for a Muslim nation such as Egypt as well to be able to see. How does that get played out, at least from your side?
Well, we have well, we here in Egypt, we consider Hamas and Islamic Jihad part of the Palestinian resistance to the Israeli occupation in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem. Here in Cairo, the Egyptian people, we distinguish between East Jerusalem, and that was occupied by the Israeli army in 1967, and Western Jerusalem. So, of course, as far as Egypt is concerned, strategically speaking, We want to stop managing this conflict between the Israelis and the Palestinians. And we hope that peace negotiations between the two parties would resume as soon as possible. Short of that, I'm sorry to say that what we are seeing today in Gaza would be repeated. And this is, as I said earlier, madam, this is not the first time. But I personally hope, and many Egyptians would share my opinion, that this operation would be the last one. But the situation on the ground does not point to that direction, regrettably. But as far as Egyptian policies are concerned, I guess Egypt would keep coordinating with its Arab partners, with international partners who are really sincere and genuine in their desire, in their hopes to bring a peaceful solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
And Rafael, I'd like to throw a little bit of the spoke in the works here, because there is no denying that there is some sort of political angle to this as well. Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich and others in his party have said that this will not end until Israel retakes the Gaza Strip. Now, again, let me be very clear and point out that is a situation seen by one of the far-right parties of Israel's government and doesn't represent the entire coalition. But surely that is not going to be seen well internationally, or at least in the eyes of the Egyptians who could be mediating, or at least trying to mediate this conflict.
Well, first of all, you have to see if this is really the best solution to retake Gaza. We would be very happy if the Egyptians would take Gaza. The Gaza Strip is a very complicated place of the world. People are there suffering on the humanitarian point of view. There are millions of people there, a lot of youth unemployed, a lot of poverty. It's a very complicated place to manage, to run. We would be very glad to have an international party taking care of it, or Egypt taking care of it. I remind, just in parentheses, that considering terrorism, we do help the Egyptians in Sinai with their terrorist problem, and they have a very bad terrorist problem in the Sinai, and they have the help militarily, technically, of the Israelis. We would like to have the same help from them with the terrorism that is in Gaza. Because right now, nobody here in Israel seriously considers retaking Gaza, conquering Gaza. First of all, it's much too dangerous. It wouldn't be good for anybody. We just spoke of collateral damage. Can you imagine how much collateral damage there is in guerrilla warfare? Not to mention the danger for our soldiers. This might force the Hezbollah, that doesn't want to go into this conflict, it might force them to intervene, and of course the West Bank and even the PLO also staying, if you noticed, quiet and very discreet, might have also to. So it would be a chaos, a shambles. It would justify a multi-frontal war against Israel. I don't really think we are reached that stage. On the contrary, we do not need to retake Gaza. We have to free Gaza. I say it again, from the Hamas. Right now, there is a humanitarian crisis on the way, because the passages are closed. In 2 or 3 days, there will be no more fuel for electricity. There will be no electricity in Gaza.
Passages from both Israel and Egypt, you're referring to?
Yes, but even if they reopen from Egypt, it will help on the humanitarian side, but it will not be enough to have electricity. And then hospitals will have a problem. They have generators, but they need fuel for that. And maybe the moment has come to change now the strategy in Israel. And we're speaking of if the Hamas should come in, and I said yes, the Hamas should come in, because we should tell the Hamas now they have an ultimatum. If they don't want to lose Gaza, they have to interfere, and they have to give an order to Islamic Jihad to stop. The Hamas can do it. The Hamas can stop the Islamic Jihad, and we have to corner them or strangle them into doing so.
And Hussein, in the last minute that we have left of the broadcast, I'd like to give you a chance to respond to that. How do you feel about whether it's even viable if Egypt would take over the Gaza Strip, in a sense, to ease the tensions? Is that a viable option?
Not at all, madam. And I don't think it would be a wise move on the part of the Israelis to reconquer Gaza once again. I guess we should concentrate all our efforts, international, regional efforts, in finding a solution, a long-term solution, political solution to the Palestinian-Israeli conflict according to the United Nations Security Council resolution and the establishment of an independent Palestinian state in the West Bank and in the Gaza Strip. That, from an Egyptian point of view, madam, this is the only way to bring an end to this ever-recurring military showdowns between the Israelis and the Palestinians. Many victims on the part of the Palestinians and on the part of the Israelis have fallen to this idea that the West Bank belongs by history to the Israelis.
Hussein Aridi, I'm sorry to cut you off, but we are coming to the end of our broadcast. And